to this very special webinar. We will get into formal introductions shortly. One of the things, that I do with my students is encourage students to frame everything from a place of current events. So to frame our very special session today, we're going to start off with a music video that's going to frame our very special discussion.
Country's haunted streets filled with angry souls, carrying signs, crying out again for injustices told. On that dark night, a man spent a bad $20 bill. 8 minutes of torture, begged for mercy, then he was killed.
Under a near hatred, George Floyd met his terrible end. 400 years of the same hate and bigotry, yet again. Blind men in power, pouring gasoline on a burning fire. Mindless words spat out in a minute's time like a clueless child.
Can you feel his pain? He didn't die in vain. We can't let this happen again. It's time to bring about a change. Texas, looking for a better start. He loved his daughters, looked out for friends, left with broken hearts. Like brothers Garner, Rice, McDonald, Arbery and Brown. Dark depths of racism, gotta stop taking all these good men down. Can you feel his pain? He didn't die in vain. We can't let this happen again.
That was a ballad of the George Floyd music video, and it was born out of a tragedy, the tragic murder of George Floyd. And that is an event that has forever changed the trajectory of and the conversations about racial equity and social justice in America. I want to thank Dave Spector, who wrote the song, and he's on vocals and guitar, Brother John Katke, vocals and keyboards, and last but not least, Billy Branch on harmonica and vocals. And if that name is familiar, that's because Billy Branch is my big brother. And I'm not talking about brother, but the THA. That's my big brother, Billy Branch. So I want to thank you all. They recorded that video specifically for today's event. So thank you guys so much for that. I'm not going to get into formal introductions. And I want to introduce my co-host, Dan Preto. Hi, Dan. Dan is the interim dean of the Division of Health Sciences and Human Services. I want to thank President Elliott Stern. There he is. Hi, Dr. Stern, the president of Saddleback College. Carrie Irwin, assistant dean of Career Technical Education. Chelsea, our program specialist in Health Sciences and Human Services, program specialist for Human Services. And a special thanks as well to my dear friend and my sister, Anahita Madavi, for linking me with Dr. West. We want to honor Dr. West's presence today. We're going to hear from Dr. West in just a moment. But for now, I'm going to turn this over to President Stern so that he can welcome Dr. West to this very special event.
Thank you so much, Kim. It is truly an honor at this time to be able to introduce Dr. West to Saddleback College. What a moment in time for the world, for our country, and for our college in our own evolution. So what a wonderful time to be welcoming Dr. West. Dr. West, as some of you may not know, actually grew up in California in the Sacramento area. His mother was actually a teacher. He is not new to the world of education and served as a principal as well. Dr. West, as some of you do know, graduated from Harvard, magna cum laude, of course. He earned his PhD from Princeton in philosophy. He was the first African-American to do so. And that was just in 1980, I'd like to remind us, just 40 years ago. He also did postdoc work at the Yale Divinity School. Dr. West serves as professor of African American Studies at Princeton. He still maintains emeritus status there. He previously served as professor of public philosophy at Harvard. In case you don't know, he is considered one of the foremost scholars of African American history in our country today. He has written about 19 very enduring books, the very first of which, and I read in 1993, Race Matters, was just recently republished as in considered a classic. I want you to know that while Dr. West is known for his scholarship among academics, he is known for his oratory across our country. And I am in awe of his oratory and have known it for quite a long time. I used to watch Firing Line on PBS with William F. Buckley, and Dr. West was on there. He's laughing because he may remember the show where he was defending liberal arts education with William Buckley. It was a great show. From then, I rediscovered him in the aughts when I was teaching, when he'd be on NPR with Tavis Smiley, and I so enjoyed those shows. I would actually work my commute into the NPR schedule to make sure I could be commuting when Tavis Smiley was on so I could hear Dr. West. He appears on CNN and many other networks. You just saw a very moving tribute to George Floyd. One last final thing I just wanted to mention is that I recently saw Dr. West again. This is in the most recent time that I saw him was on CNS just after George Floyd's murder. And it was the family that was bringing the attention to the story again, because they were demonstrating so much love and compassion and thanks to those who were supporting them instead of what we might have expected in terms of anger from them. And Anderson Cooper, the anchor that was interviewing Cornel West, was befuddled by this, amazed by this, and in awe of this. And Dr. West spoke eloquently of how it is part of African American culture to give love even when we are being subjugated. And that is who Dr. West is. He brings colloquialisms to intellectual constructs. He brings the cerebral to the visceral. He touches us at our heart on the most important issues of the day. Anderson Cooper was crying, as I was at that moment. And Dr. West reminded him that when we cry, it reminds us that we are not numb. So today, our college is reminded that we too are not numb. Welcome, Dr. West, to Saddleback College.
Thank you so much, my brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, President Stern. You're about to make me cry now, and I can't do that. I don't want to do that just now. Thank you so much for that. I would like to add that, of course, that was such a beautiful introduction of Dr. West. And Dr. West, you're so much, you're so big, you're so much, there's so much more to you. I just want to share for those of you who may not know of Dr. West that he is a renowned intellect. He is a lover of music, classical violinist that I just learned. And he is a co-host of a weekly podcast called The Tightrope. And again, he's so much more. And it is our honor, Dr. West, to have you with us today. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. I would like to articulate for our audience the format and the goals of today's webinar. And there may be a couple added, but we are going to pose a few questions to Dr. West relative to the theme, which is the cultivation of social justice and racial equality in educational and professional settings. That particular topic cannot be contained, but that is the foundation of today's event. And I want to refer to Dan to see if he has any opening statements. And before we do that, I do want to add toward the end of today's session, we will entertain some of the questions that were submitted. We did receive quite a few questions for Dr. West. I don't think we'll be able to go through all of them, but we will certainly pose some of the questions that were submitted to Dr. West. So Dan, I'll turn this over to you.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us, community members, faculty, staff, administrators, family, and friends. It is all of our treat to be with you, Dr. West. So thank you for blessing us with your presence today. As we were talking before we opened up the webinar today, as I said, our goal is to be able to sit around in the living room and have a chat about the important things that are going on in our lives together and the things that are fundamentally bringing us together as humans. So I'm so grateful for Kim to be able to organize this. Thank you for all the efforts. And I appreciate Dr. Stern, your kind welcome for Dr. West as well. So without further ado, I will let Kim kick us off here. And we can't wait to hear Dr. West, your perspectives today. So thank you again.
Fantastic. And what I meant to say a moment ago, a couple of the takeaways that I'm hoping for today is that our audience and our friends and family members walk away with hope. So Dr. West, I am going to begin my first question, and I'm gonna frame it around your famous dialogue of hope versus optimism. Because I had a conversation with a dear friend recently, Dr. Madavi, and I made the mistake of referring to Dr. West as an optimist. And she very quickly corrected me. So I want to ask you, in the face of, and I want to say this, I think of my brother Billy, when we talk about what's happening in our society today relative to racial equality and social justice, et cetera. It's something that we've whispered in America for many years. And today we get to say it out loud. Unfortunately, this pandemic, the murder of Floyd and many others that have so far gone with impunity has allowed us an opportunity to have a discussion out loud that we don't normally have. So I'm going to exploit this opportunity. And I'm going to ask you, in the face of systemic racism, and the realities of racial and social injustices and police brutality and the schisms in our society and the what feels like separation instead of integration of us. In the face of all of that, Dr. West, can you share with us, and I can't think of a better person, can you share to do so? Can you share with us hope versus optimism in the face of what we're all living through in our current times?
Ooh, you start with such a powerful and profound question, but I'm not surprised. We expect that out of Professor Branch Stewart, Sister Kim. Thank you so very much for having me. That your reputation precedes you. I've heard so many magnificent things about you, and they are all true.
Thank you,
Very
Dr.
much
West.
so. Indeed, Saddleback is so blessed to have you. And I want to salute the captain of the ship, my dear brother Elliot Stern. Those words cut so deep, really. He started on a very, very high note in terms of his sincerity and his willingness to be so candid about his own deep sensitivity. Of course, he hails from the city of Detroit. See, people born in Detroit got a jump start in life. You know what I mean? That's one of the great cities in the country, no doubt about it. Very much so. My dear brother Dean Dan, it was so good to see you. We talked a little bit before about last night, and salute the work that you're doing. Sister Chelsea as well, and wonderful work that she does. And I think to begin to answer your question, though, my dear sister, we really begin with the performance. We begin with the performance, because what we heard in the music is very much what takes place between you and my beloved Anahita Madavi. It has to do with certain spirituality. It has to do with a certain moral tenacity. The music should not in any way be ornamental or decorative in our lives. It is constitutive of who we are. It is integral to who we are. Brother Dan and I were talking about him listening to John Coltrane Love Supreme last night after listening to the dialogue on the tightrope. And I know Brother Dan can speak for himself, but he knows that Coltrane is constitutive of who he is. It's not external. It's not something that he holds at arm's length. And we all need that sense of hope as a verb that puts us in motion, that touches our souls and unsettles our minds and empowers our hearts. So that when we think of education, when we think of our profession, we have to recognize the degree to which it always has a spiritual and a moral dimension. Now, the reason why I'm very suspicious of optimism is because I come from the Socratic legacy of Athens and the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem. See, Socrates was not optimistic. Socrates was someone who was continually committed to an integrity and was willing to hold on to that kind of allegiance to integrity unto death, the drinking of the hemlock, the rejection by his own society, the marginalizing by his own community. You see, Amos, Esther, Jesus, Muhammad, the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem, and that genius of Hebrew scripture that says we are going to spread hesed, we're going to spread steadfast love and loving kindness to the orphan and the widow, the fatherless, the motherless, the poor, the vulnerable, the weak, no matter what. No matter what the evidence says. Now, see, optimism tends to say, well, let's just check and see what the evidence says and see whether it would allow us to infer that we could have an upbeat perspective. No, we don't want that. No matter what the evidence says, we are plowing forward in the name of something bigger than us, of a love, of a justice, of an equality, of democracy, of a God, of beauty, of truth, of goodness. Something bigger than us. And you all are so right to talk about the hope that I have been blessed with in terms of allowing it to filter through my own fallible and finite self. And that comes from mom and dad. You know, the highest honor I've ever had in my life has been the second son of Clifton and Irene. I'll never be the person my mother is. The elementary school named after her. My father been gone 26 years. I'll never be the man that he was. You see what I mean? So that, and I can take no credit for that whatsoever. All I can be is try to be true to that. Remember that line Curtis Mayfield wrote for Gene Chandler? Just be true.
Yes.
I've given you all of me and plan to give even more, baby.
Yes.
That's the notion. I've given you all and plan to give even more, baby. It's like, whoo, that's Chicago genius. And I know the band come from Chicago, Brother Billy and John and David, but it's that sense of, look, we only here for so long between mama's womb and tomb. What kind of human beings we're gonna be? Mm-hmm. What kind of virtues we're gonna enact? What kind of values we're gonna try to embody? What kind of vision will lure us? Because all of us will fall short. Yes, we need each other. What's the quality of our bounce back? And see, hope is about the bounce back. Optimism, spectatorial, let's just get a sense and survey of where things are and see. No. And see, being hope is about being a thermostat rather than a thermometer. The thermometer say, oh, let's just reflect what things are and see, just register what things are. No, the thermometer won't come in shaping, moving, refashioning, transforming, just like education. See, we get these precious students at Saddleback. Yes. And he where y'all got that name, Saddleback? And I said, oh, that's the Cleveland National Forest and those two peaks I see. They got that Saddleback. When I was there with my brother Rick Warren at Saddleback Church, I said, this Saddleback, where is this coming from? Saddleback. Well, it's a beautiful name. But the precious students come to Saddleback, and what do you want? You want them to see a hope in you. You don't even have to talk about the hope. They should see a commitment to integrity in you, to see a commitment to decency in you, see a commitment to open-mindedness in you. It's not even a matter of having an abstract discourse about it. You know what I mean? That's why your mama don't need to have no discourse on love. You feel it in the concrete. Your daddy don't need it. Your loved ones, your friends don't have a discourse on friendship. They enacting it all the time. It's tangible. It's something that cannot not deny. It's reality. You cannot not know in that way. And so in that sense, I think we need this hope enacted more than anything else. And for me, the hope is inseparable from the love, but love not in terms of some kind of superficial sensibility, but it's a giving and a listening, a receiving and an openness. It's a protecting, it's a respecting, but it's also a correcting. You need all three of those dimensions in talking about love. And because justice for me is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private, that we have to learn how to be tender and sweet and kind. I mean, what we heard, the ballad of George Floyd was soulful. And what is soulfulness? It's the sharing of a soothing sweetness against the backdrop of a grim catastrophe. See, that's what soul is. When you hear the voice of Billy, it could be Billy Branch, could be Billie Holiday, could be Stevie Wonder, could be, and soul comes in a number of different forms. You know what I mean? You got Bob Dylan got some soul. He's blues brother from the vanilla side of town, the Jewish brother from Minnesota, Robert Zimmerman. Hall & Oates got it. Average White Band got it. It's not a question of skin pigmentation. Right. It's the choices we make in the face of catastrophe to be compassionate, critical, and creative, but also humble.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So in that sense, what we talk about this afternoon, this morning for you all in California is set by that ballad of George Perry Floyd Jr. by those grand musicians that we heard. It's blues-like. It's blues-like, and the blues ain't nothing but a personal narrative of a catastrophe lyrically expressed. That's what it is. It's a strange fruit, catastrophe, strange American fruit. Terrorism, lynching, Billie Holiday, written by the Jewish brother, Maripo. Nobody loves me but my mama, and she might be jiving too. That's the king of the
Dr. West, speaking
That's
of
B.B. King right there.
You mentioned humility here, and you previously mentioned in some of your other lectures, even as probably more recently than 2016, but I was rewatching your lecture at Long Beach City College in 2016. And you mentioned the way to get to know America is to listen to the poor, the workers, the imprisoned, the homeless. What do you think as a college, or who should we be listening to get to know the story of Saddleback?
Wonderful, wonderful. And that was a dialogue I think we had with Sister Anna. We had a rich dialogue then. No, but see, I come from a people, my brother, whose anthem is lift every voice. Now lift every echo.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want just extensions of an echo chamber.
Mm.
See, we want voice. And to find your voice means first, you have to engage in a formation of attention. You got to tend to the things that matter so that your quest for moral, intellectual, and spiritual excellence is based on something firm, something real. If you're just going to expout and emote, then you're just going to be an echo.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't be a blues woman if you don't find your voice. You're just an echo. You're just imitating somebody, just emulating somebody, just an extension of some little group or tribe or ideology or whatever. When you find your voice, you discover that lo and behold, just like your fingerprint, it's just yours. It's unique. It's singular. Can't nobody raise that voice but you. And so I want to lift every voice, all colors, all genders, all sexual orientations, all religious, non-religious, and so forth. The problem has been historically that because of the vicious legacies of white supremacy and male supremacy, because of the legacies of wealth inequalities, so many of our poor brothers and sisters of all colors haven't been able to gain access to education, that the voices have been constrained and limited. So you're absolutely right. We want to listen to the voices of our precious indigenous brothers and sisters. We want to listen to the voices of our Black brothers and sisters, our brown brothers and sisters, our Asian brothers and sisters, our poor white brothers and sisters. But in listening to the voices, we critically filter it. You know, a lot of people say, well, Brother West, you know, we like you speaking the truth to power. I say, well, I appreciate the compliment, but I would want to try to speak the truth to everybody.
Yes.
You see what I mean? So you got to speak the truth to the relatively powerless. Nobody has monopoly on truth. No group, no individual.
Mm-hmm.
You see, all of us are fallen and finite. All of us have something to learn, just like a jazz man. I can't wait to listen to the new voices because I got some voices inside of me. And maybe when I've listened to those voices, I can incorporate them and bounce off other voices and produce something that's new and novel. Even though nothing that's new is wholly novel. Just like nothing that's old is wholly obsolete. We can all learn from the past, no matter what. And whatever newness you produce, you're just generating a new tradition of the new. Because every new is parasitic and based on antecedent realities and practices, right? That's what it is to be in space and time and history. And so in that sense, really, I think it's going to be a question of listening to the voices that have been excluded and allowing their voices to be taken seriously, and undergoing critical scrutiny. So it's not as if because you're a new voice, you're necessarily right.
Right.
It's not as if you're an old voice, you're necessarily right. Right's bigger than all of us. Truth bigger than all of us. Beauty, goodness, bigger than all of us. You know what I mean? So that's part of the humility that has to be democratized. But it's also one that's critical of a status quo that for so long has been too exclusionary.
Yes.
And see, that's part of our challenge, but it has to be done in such a way that it accents the best in each and every one of us. You know, when I used to go to Shiloh Baptist Church when I was growing up, that's one of the great moments. My West family is inseparable from Shiloh. Really, Pete Cook was my pastor. We had pastors then, we didn't have CEOs. So we were very different kind of, didn't have market models. You know what I mean? We had choirs, we didn't have prayer. We had choirs, we didn't have prayer teams. And so that was a little different. We had that thick blood at the cross. It hadn't been turned into Kool-Aid like some of these churches, but we won't go into that right now. But the challenge here is that they would tell us, little Cornel, if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. And the question becomes, as teachers, administrators, Socratic heaven, serious questioning of self, society, the world, the species. Prophetic legacy of Jerusalem, right? Moral, spiritual heaven, hesed, love, care, concern. And keep in mind, you see, justice is something that is inseparable from love, but is not reducible to love. Any justice that's only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. You got to have something deeper than justice. You got to care. You have to have genuine concern. You have to have the hesed. You have to have the loving kindness. You have to have the genuine compassion. That's deeper than justice. See, what we heard in the music, those three brothers, they weren't just singing about justice. They were singing about justice embraced by something deeper. You could feel it in the harmonica. You could feel it in the voice. You could feel it in the guitar. The brother in the piano was in the back, but he was in his sound was still inseparable from that collective sonic expression, you see. And so even a song about justice is more than just justice. Something else is going on, something deep down in the heart and soul to try to get us to be awakened so we don't have that coldness, that numbness that President Stern was talking about. We don't have that cold-heartedness, that indifference. You know, that's probably one of the saddest features of the human condition. Indifference to the suffering of others. The great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say, indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. My dear brother, William James, right here at Harvard. I can just see his house right around the corner here at Irving Street. I'm right on, well, I shouldn't give my address. People I got a lot of death threats, so I'm gonna hold off on my address. Even they can find it out if they want to. But William James lived right around the corner on Irving Street. And he used to say what? Indifference is the one trait that makes the very angels weep. See, that's the most adorable, the most of all public philosophers, William James. He's a lovable brother, you see. But that indifference, this is what we're wrestling with in so many ways in our, given the spiritual decay and the more decrepitude in the country right now, is this indifference, just not caring, this impunity, saying and doing anything and think you can get away with it. Feeling as if you can go through life with no accountability, no answerability, no responsibility whatsoever. And just look at people and say, now what you gonna do now? Talk about them bad. Refuse to answer the question in the debate. Just keep moving. Wait a minute. We got rules here. We got accountability, mechanism of accountability here. Oh, they don't mean nothing to me. This is the triumph of Thrasymachus over Socrates in Plato's Republic. Might makes right. Greed is good. Compassion is a loser. Love is impotent. And that's the history of white supremacy in America. You see that it tried to convince Black people. Black love is a crime. That's why we're gonna take your baby and take it to Alabama when you in Virginia. When you fall in love with your wife, she gonna be sold to Georgia and you gonna go to Florida. You see, don't you ever love anybody such that you think that somehow it can flower and flourish. Black love is a crime. Black hope is a joke. Black freedom is a pipe dream. Black history is a curse. You're the wrong color. You're less beautiful. You're less moral. You're less intelligent. And we're going to tell the world that. We're going to try to convince you that for 400 years. And what have Black folk done in the face of those kind of lies and crimes? We've dished out love warriors. Here comes John Coltrane's Love Spring. Here comes Stevie Wonder's Love and the Need of Love. Here comes James Baldwin's Love Soap Essays. Here comes Martin Luther King Jr. Here comes Fannie Lou Hamer. Here comes Frederick Douglass. Terrorize us. We're not going to terrorize you back. We're not going to create a Black version of the Ku Klux Klan. No. No. Here come Ida B. Wells from Chicago. She wants freedom for everybody in the red terrorize us. We aren't going to terrorize you back. We're going to embrace you. Here come Mama Till, the mother of Emmett Till. What did she say at her son's funeral? I don't have a minute to hate. I will pursue justice for the rest of my life. Tears flowing, weeping like Jeremiah, weeping like Jesus, but still wise like Socrates, grounded in the blues, tied to a Palestinian Jew named Jesus, standing there looking at her only baby, Emmett Till, 14 years old. I don't have a minute to hate. I'm going to pursue justice based on a love. Emmett Till did that all of her life till she died. Now, that's a tremendous gift. Tremendous gift. And that's my tradition. I tell my white brothers and sisters, my vanilla brothers, I'll say, you know, when you see Black people, you ought to just give them a standing ovation. Because if we had created Black versions of the Ku Klux Klan, there'd been a civil war every generation. Every generation, you see. So, but the question becomes, can we sustain the love and justice rather than the hatred and revenge? Because there's no guarantee that rich tradition, that democratic leaven in the loaf can survive. If the younger generation decides, Brother West, you played out, man. That Martin Luther King Jr. stuff, that love stuff, that integrity stuff, that ain't got us nothing. We gonna be gangsters just like the folk who gangsterize us. If they hate us, we gonna hate them back. They terrorize us, we gonna terrorize them back. I say, no, don't get in the gutter. Don't get in the gutter. The winner of a rat race is still a rat. We want to be humans. We want to have something deeper. That's the spiritual and the moral challenge. And that's very much where we are now in terms of the polarizing and gangsterizing in the society.
Dr. West, I wanted to, responding to what you said about choices in the face of catastrophe. And I love that. As educators, we're in such a special position. So I want to switch it up a little bit and talk about voices in the face of catastrophe. Because one of the things I encourage of my students is to find their voice, whatever that may be. Absolutely. And we explore together our prejudices, all of us, which could be a very humbling experience. But part of our jobs, as far as I'm concerned, is to create that safe environment so we can not just have the dialogue, but through the dialogue, find the courage to bring about some of the changes to mitigate these catastrophes that we've been living with. So again, just focusing on the tangible of the how-tos and the action steps of going forward from this day on, of sharing this with our students and faculty alike who have inquired through the questions that were submitted. People want to know, how do we encourage the voices in the face of catastrophe? How do we have the dialogue from opposite ends of the spectrum, yet we can come together on one accord for the same goal? Because I truly believe at the end of the day, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily, we have that same goal. So again, as educators, I think it's a gift. I'm humbled to be in the position that I'm in. And I also want to say, I received an email from a colleague, and I'm not going to say her name, but it humbled me because I recognized my own prejudice about this particular person, my internal prejudgment about this person. And when I read the email, it brought me to tears because it was so disconnected from my prejudgment. So it does affect us all, right? But how do we, going back to that cultivation, that nourishment, that growth, how, as a master educator, how do we carry this into the class for students, faculty, staff alike? What is the how-to for that? How do we do that?
Oh, appreciate it. See, I was going to say, just go to your classroom and watch you and see you do what you do. because we're talking about the levels of educational excellence that doesn't indoctrinate students, it educates students. Yes. It gets students to open their minds. You see, in the end, Percy Shelley is right when he talked about how in the end, we all have to be poets and philosophers, which is not to say versifiers, but poets are those who use their imagination and empathy in order to inspire people to authorize a different reality.
Yeah.
That's when he says poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, that last line in that defense of poetry that he wrote in 1822, right before he died at the age of 29. Right? And as philosophers, we're lovers of wisdom. Now, I think poets are deeper than philosophers oftentimes, because philosophers get tied into science and forms of rationality, such that they can make rationality and science itself a kind of idol and don't recognize that there's limits to science, there's limits to rationality, even though science and rationality are indispensable for who we are as persons. So that in the end, what you do in your classroom is you get your precious students to see things that they hadn't seen before. To see things they hadn't seen before, to feel more deeply, to shatter whatever forms of indifference and callousness they may have been socialized into, so that there's a larger overflowing of Hesed in their souls. And then to find their own voices. They say, oh, Professor Branch Stewart, she got her voice. She's got her vocation. How do I aspire to find my voice and my vocation, my calling, not just my career, my vocation, not just my profession, my fundamental task in life, not just my job. See, that's deeply spiritual and moral in that way. Now, what I've been blessed to do for 47 years, when students come into my class, I tell them, I say, you have entered this classroom to learn how to die. And they said, dang, I thought I was just showing up, learn something, get a grade, and keep moving, get my degree. No. This is going to be Socratic. Plato says philosophy itself is a meditation on and preparation for death, but not just physical death. Anytime someone gives up a certain assumption and presupposition that's blinding them so they cannot see, it's a form of death. And from that moment of death, there is rebirth, there is growth, there is development. So you learn how to die in order to learn how to live well, wisely, excellently. Now, of course, my own Christian tradition, Paul says Christians must die daily, because we got all this ugly stuff inside of us, sin and gangster proclivities and so forth and so on, you see. And you remember that wonderful eulogy that the great Dorothy Day, our vanilla Catholic sister, wrote for Brother Martin Luther King Jr. when he was murdered. She said, Martin Luther King Jr. learned how to die daily. That's all she needed to say. Because he's continually questioning himself in a Socratic way. He's continually trying to cultivate a critical orientation tied to his maturation of a loving soul. They've got to go hand in hand. Love of wisdom, love of neighbor. And I'm a Christian, so I love my enemies. Because anybody who's a Christian, man, you have a whole lot of enemies. You don't want your enemies to be the point of reference. If you're obsessed with your enemies, you're never going to do what you're here to do. You see, but you love them because they can change. They can go another way. I get in a lot of trouble calling Donald Trump my brother. You know, how can Donald Trump be your brother? I know he acts like a gangster. Ain't no doubt about that. The evidence is strong. But he's got the capacity to go another way. He's made in the image of God. He's made in the same image of God that I am. And therefore, in that way, as a Christian, one has brothers even when they are out to cut your neck off. It makes no sense in the eyes of the world. So what? It's still a desirable way of being in the world. Because that love is something, that justice is something that's not reducible to just trashing or tied to trashing one's foes. Now, he is a political foe. I'm not naive, I'm not sadomasochistic. But I can stay in contact with his humanity, even in his gangster activity, because I got some gangster in me. And I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. So I know a gangster when I see it, because it's right in here. And so when I come at him, I can see the gangster, and I can go at him tooth and nail, and I can still keep track of his humanity. But we want our students to have that kind of patience and a kind of, what would be, tolerance is too weak a term, but a kind of acknowledgement of our humanity at the best and the worst. James Baldwin used to say, we are both wonders and disasters at the same time. And that's a wonderful way of putting it, really. And I think that's true for all of us, you see. And so there's something you can get in contact with of one's humanity. Yeah, go right ahead, though, brother.
You know, in that duality, that dichotomy of, you know, we are who we are and also a work in progress in some ways. From, I was talking to Professor Branch Stewart here a little while ago, and I wanted your perspective on this. As we are people who care about creating equity and justice in the world, I wanted to get your perspective on this, like on this analogy, if you will. So bear with me as I work this out.
No, you take your time to work that out, my brother.
Are we working from the place of decreasing white supremacy, decreasing segregation, decreasing racial injustice, decreasing the things that are, if you will, evil in the world, to get to a point of neutrality? Like there's nothing there. We're just copacetic. Or are we working from a place of building structure and of equal power institutions that are based on equity, that have justice interwoven into the ethos? Are we working from a place of everyone has a level playing field and privilege? So are we working backwards to neutrality? Or are we working towards something that's completely new, that's on the other side of the pendulum? Or is it both at the same time?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I would want all of you all to jump in, though, Sister Kim, Sister Chelsea, and anybody else who wants to help us out here. I think that, I mean, because we are who we are in process, that we're never, ever going to be able to create paradise, utopia, heaven on earth. That's just who we are as human beings. And the great Reinhold Niebuhr used to say, democracy is a proximate solution to insoluble problems. Because as long as we're born from our mama's womb with fears, insecurities, and anxieties on our way to being the culinary delight of terrestrial worms, and acknowledging that death is unavoidable and inescapable, despair, disease we have on the way, that we're never going to be able to create what is required for any kind of perfect interaction, perfect society. It can be an ideal, we can aspire to it. So in that sense, we're building on the best of the past. And one thing we can't do, we can't think that somehow, you know, we're creating a wheel, you know, like we the first ones to be woke. Please spare me. Get off your symbolic crack pipe now. People been woke for centuries. You got white brothers and sisters been fighting against white supremacy for centuries, right? You got men who've been fighting against male supremacy for centuries. Now, it's a small group, but it's still a history. And that memory becomes very important. So for me, because history and memory is so crucial, and being in connection with the voices of those who are dead, you see, that's part of our learning process. That's why traditions are so very important. You see, that's why heritages are so very important. Cutting across the grain, across racial lines, across national lines, and so forth. So that my hunch is, my brother, I'm leaning much more toward the model, not of neutrality, but the model of lifting voices, voices heard, those voices shaping the destiny of our schools, our communities, our nations. That's called democracy, capital D. Now, we're not talking about any political party have a monopoly on democracy. Now, we won't get into all of that right now. But democracy at its deepest level with John Dewey, the great American philosopher, the great modern philosopher, said democracy is a way of life. It's a mode of being in the world. And what is democracy as a way of life? It is Socratic, which means humility, fallibility, listening to others, those who you agree, those who you disagree. You can gain insights from those you disagree with, even if you reject their conclusion. We learn much from Plato. We don't accept Plato's authoritarian regime in the Republic. But in the process, the dialogue is so rich, the free play of the mind is so magnificent that it gets us to see things that we hadn't seen before, you see, even though the conclusion is bad. We can read T.S. Eliot's poetry, very authoritarian, anti-Jewish sensibility, but my God, still has some wisdom there. You see. Thomas Jefferson, slaveholder, Black woman violator, words on the page. All those words on the page can still move you in the Declaration of Independence. How do you account for that complexity? He's human, just like us. And you can imagine what they're going to say about us 150 years from now if the planet's still around. Because we don't know what nuclear catastrophe and ecological catastrophe, who knows? But 150 years from now, if the planet's still around, what are they going to say about us? How did these people put up with all of these bombs being dropped on people? I mean, nobody talked about, for example, doing our dear brother Barack Obama. And I love my brother. He's brilliant. He's poised and so forth. But people know I was very critical. But he was dropping 25,000 bombs a year. You never know that. News didn't talk about it, right? Drones on instant phone. People gonna go back 150 years and say, dang, they were in love with this brother for good reason. I was in love with him too. But I still was Socratic. I still was prophetic. I said, who died from those bombs? A little baby in Somalia killed by a drone has the same value as a baby on the way to Saddleback, on the way to Harvard. I don't care what color that baby is. But again, we're not seeing enough. And by constraining and truncating the sight, you don't see the ways in which forms of evil, forms of war and domination are really operating. You can be a vanilla brother and sister growing up in the United States in 1950 and say, I live in a country where everybody's free. There's people in Mississippi just because you live in upstate New York. You're just not seeing the humanity of the precious Black brothers and sisters in Mississippi. And they're getting lynched down there. They're getting Jim Crow and Jane Crow. And they're going to segregated schools. See broader, part of our education, Sister Kim. And then have a feeling for them, not pity. We don't want pity. William Blake is right. Pity itself victimizes. It's condescending. Oh, how you doing down there? I say you're catching hell. Sorry about that. And keep moving. Or when you see somebody on the corner, you give them $5 and feel good about yourself, rather than sit and talk with them and say, what you going through, sister? Tell me your story. Well, I had a good job, in fact, but my mother died and my boyfriend violated me and my kid got caught on crack, and that catastrophe overwhelmed me in such a way. The next thing I know, I lost my job. I've been homeless for 3 months. I say, my dear sister, you stronger than I am. And of course, I get a little chauvinistic with my religion. I say, you religious? Yeah, I'm a Christian. We're going to pray right now. Pray for me. I'm praying for you. Then I give them $5 because I got a little bit more cash, at least for the moment. I give them more cash. But it ain't $5 pity. No. We on the same level as human beings. That's a compassion. And compassion is always deeper than pity in that way, you see. And it's that we're after with our students, you see. So it's not this do-gooder missionary orientation of top down, but it's equal, human to human, eye to eye, soul to soul, mind to mind. We in this together. So if we, if we were in this, as we're in this together, I wanted to present this, this idea, in bringing it to the practical. Certainly this is a little pie in the sky, if you will, but if you had the chance to build a higher ed institution from the ground up with the cornerstone of equity and justice as the values, what do you think that would look like and how would you do it? I had a chance, really. I was in Ethiopia in the 1990s, right after the repressive communists were pushed out. They had to completely reinvent Addis Ababa University. And they brought a number of us in. And I mean, I wasn't running the committee, but I was running my mouth on the committee, trying to be influential, because we're starting from scratch almost. Now, you never start from scratch totally, but there's that sense. And what was the aim? Well, the aim was going to be, how do we ensure that the students who pass through here will have access to a Socratic energy that will set them on fire intellectually, so they will have a curiosity and a sense of perplexity about the world that will humble them, but also make them tenacious in terms of being moral and spiritual persons. Then the question became, well, what kind of skills will be required? That's where STEM comes in. This is where science comes in, right? This is where the rigors of quantitative analysis. And it's very different than qualitative analysis, because quantitative analysis is just indispensable, crucial, but will never give you a sense of value, significance, purpose, will never give you a sense of experiences of love and beauty. Well, the equations can be beautiful, though. Let me take that back. But with human love. So you have to have both of those fronts taken care of in terms of then exemplars. You had to have exemplary figures and books that try to enact and ignite the Socratic energy of the questioning, right? The scientific sense of experimentation, exploration, always concerned about evidence tied to arguments with valid inferences are made. And then the third, though, is a sense of community. There's got to be a sense of community. And the sense of community is never predicated on unanimity. It's predicated on the proliferation of persons who learn how to respect other persons to constitute a public sphere, a commonality that all feel they can enter without humiliation, without being put down, without being looked down on. You see, and that's the most difficult thing, because probably one of the most difficult things we human beings have, of course, is vulnerability. You see, too many of us are like Hamlet, who suffers from the inability to love. He's the most brilliant literary protagonist of all of modern literature in Europe, written by Shakespeare, of course. But he suffers from the inability to love. He can't be vulnerable. He can't be humble. There's only one brief moment with Yorick, who raised him when he was a little boy on his lap at the grave with the gravedigger. That's the only time you get a little sense of vulnerability in Hamlet. Shakespeare knew what he was doing, because he knew, like Dostoevsky, hell is suffering from the inability to love. And the inability to love is tied to the inability to be vulnerable, the inability to be vincible, the inability to empty yourself and give yourself to another or something bigger than you see. And so when you get a gangsterized and hellified condition, you end up with people, some of them have big money, big mansions, big status, some of them famous, but they can't be vulnerable, because every moment is titillation and stimulation. Every moment is transaction. Every moment is what I can get out of this. Every moment is in relation to me. And we see this with Brother Trump all the time. That's why he almost got to pray for the brothers, just that he's having to be head of the country right now too. You say, oh my God, but I felt this even in Charlottesville, when we were there, and the neo-Nazi brothers there cussing us out and spitting on us and everything. I just look at them, I say, ooh, I don't see no joy in their souls. I would never want to live a life with no joy. They may get some pleasure, but no joy. I bet you it's hard for them to love too. And the irony was, when we walked by the park, 22 of the groups, Klan, neo-Nazi, listening to Motown, listen to Brother Stearns, Towns, artists. And I said, this is America, isn't it? folk want to mow us down, but won't listen to the music we produce. So that they human just like me. They complicated just like me. They shot through with contradictions and incongruities just like me, but they're much bigger gangsters. See, I'm a little small G, and I'm working on it every day. But they G, growing because they're not doing too much work on it. That hatred is taking over, contempt taking over, hating Jews, hating black folk, hating. You see, they used to hate Catholics, but now David Duke, head of the Klan, he's Catholic. That's American upward mobility. Now you get a Catholic in an organization founded to kill Catholics and Jews and black folk. And I did see one black brother marching with the Nazis. That's American too.
Dr. West, if I may.
That's more than confusion, isn't it? That brother
Very
stands
confused.
in need of some deep prayer. He just mixed up. I'm sorry to go on those sisters, but yeah.
No, that's all right. I wish we could do this forever. I really do. I think Chelsea had a question for you, and I wanted to make a quick follow-up question to that really profound question that Dan posed. And then if we could, we want to make sure we get to some of the questions that our audience submitted. So Chelsea, I think you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, I was playing off of one of our past questions of living in neutrality. And I think that a lot of that to not just live there, but to educate ourselves and move forward as a society, a lot of that needs to start with the youth and younger than college and children. And as a mother of a 5-year-old little girl, I wonder how you raised your children and without taking away their innocence, but letting them know what's going on and how to teach them to question themselves and lift others' voices. And what were some of the steps you did when your children were young?
No, appreciate that question. No, and God bless your precious little one. Your daughter, you say her name is what?
Charlie.
Darlie. Yeah, indeed. God bless little precious Darlie. That, one is, and she's so blessed to have you as mom, it's the example, because young people, I think, young people always want to see sermons before they hear sermons. You know what I mean? And the examples make all the difference in the world. They will see how you relate to the brother and sister on the corner, how you will relate to black brothers and sisters, brown brothers and sisters, how you will relate to whoever. It could be well-to-do. Mom has, they say, wow, she's got this decency and integrity about her. She's just so kind to everybody. And I notice everybody's mom is not like that. I got to decide whether I want to be like mama or whether I want to be like so many other examples in the society. And the more you are embraced and she embraces you, the more she sees it in you. And then she gets older and you begin to express and articulate in a propositional form what she's already seen and experienced in the flesh. A lot of it also in the music that you'd be listening to and talk to about the music, because for our young people these days, so many of our young folk, they have such a deep suspicion of churches and mosques and synagogues and temples that music becomes one of the fundamental sources of their spiritual education. That's and really it's up to our artists not to have dumbed down sonic expressions and not to have sonic expressions that are so obsessed with bodily stimulation that it doesn't allow our young people to understand the crucial role of sweetness and kindness and gentleness and caring and nurturing. So you might have, what I did was you can imagine, I had my kids, sit down and listen to Curtis Mayfield and, oh, Daddy, he plays so slow and slow music. And I like the fast. I want a little Earth Gang or something. I say, no, I ain't got nothing against the hip hop. We're going to get the hip hop, but we're going to understand the history of it, what goes into it. Why was Kendrick Lamar named after Eddie Kendricks? Who was Eddie Kendricks, a genius from Birmingham, Alabama, singing with the Temptations and David Ruffin from Why Not Mississippi and Otis Williams? What is the relation to Kendrick's mama in Compton, Los Angeles to this Birmingham, Alabama genius? The history that's connected to two geniuses, Kendrick Lamar and Eddie Kendricks. That history that parents can provide, especially given the fact one loves or listens to both of them. You know what I mean? Those are examples that you try to have. But you can imagine, I mean, my kids, you know, once they met mom and dad, shit, I could have dropped dead a long time ago. They were gonna be all right because mom and dad are such magnificent examples. You know, there's no doubt about that. But I've been blessed, and I know your family has great examples, just like mine does. So that makes a fundamental difference. But there's never any guarantee, because in the end, we don't have control over our kids. They have to decide. They have to choose. And that's one of the things about education. In the end, they think critically for themselves. Voice. They're going to end up loving for themselves. Never ask for permission as to who you love. You got to make that choice yourself. You can ask for consultation. You can consult with other loved ones and your parents, but the permission, no, that's on you. That's going to be on you. You see, when Sister Kim decides to marry her magnificent husband, that's all on her. She made a magnificent choice, but it's on her. Her parents can't take no credit for it. Is that right, Sister Kim?
That's right. That's right, Dr. West. Thank you. And Chelsea, I love your question. I love that question. I want to say before we switch over to some of the questions that were submitted to us, I just want to say again, Dan, to your point that I thought was so profound, that I believe, and this goes back to hope, I believe that we're on the precipice of change. And for, you know, going back to some of the things we talked about a moment ago when we talked about having a voice or a choice, that's where we are right now. And so we can choose to have a voice or a choice to go forward or backward or to stay stagnant. So I'm hopeful that this event will help facilitate our forward movement to exploit, and I hate to use that term, but to exploit the momentum that we have that was born out of tragedies. And this isn't new. We can take the headlines from the 50s, the 40s on back. We can put them side by side today. We can just juxtapose headlines without a date, and we couldn't tell which headline came from which time. And so I think that to speak to the point that you made, it's time now for all of us to decide, you know, to use our voice and to make a choice, and hopefully for us to move forward.
That is
Having
so
said,
true. And to think about
pardon
this,
me,
my
sir.
dear sister, that Saddleback itself was founded during the most turbulent times and one of the most turbulent years in the history of the United States, 1968. Just think about that. Brother Martin shot down. Brother Robert Kennedy shot down. Chicago, world turned upside down. Right in the middle of a presidential election. Humphrey versus Nixon. Massive rebellions all summer. And here comes Saddleback. We got an idea. We're going to found a college. We're going to embrace some young folk. We're going to shape some precious young people in the midst of that kind of tempestuous activity. And look where you are now, and what you've been able to do and continue to do together, but still wrestling with the same issues in 1968, the racism, the poverty, the militarism, Vietnam still, you know, reigning at that time with the bombs being dropped on so many precious Vietnamese. The North still very repressive, tied to the communists. We're not talking about being uncritical about them, but we're talking about how people, precious everyday people, find themselves between a rock and a hard place. Here we are in 2020.
Here we go again.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
But we have opportunity today.
But we got the choice and the vote and the commitment, but in a spirit of humility, not self-righteousness.
That's right.
And a willingness to take a risk, because you can't love unless you take a risk, and be vulnerable and be open and tell yourself and your loved ones. Well, I mean, if you can imagine Sister Chelsea's daughter asked her, well, Mommy, why is there something rather than nothing? And you say, well, I don't really have a definitive answer. I mean, if you're religious, you can give a religious response to it in a way, but she's asking for a precise explanation and the detail. And you say, honey, I just don't know. I thought you knew everything, Mommy. Well, no, there's some things you need to discover in life that Mommy don't know everything. I just don't know. So she says, oh, humility is something that's acceptable. Acknowledging when you don't know is acceptable. That doesn't stop me from believing. It doesn't stop me from loving you. It doesn't stop me from exploring the world. But there's certain things you just don't know. And that's important too.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. West. So Dan, you want to start us off with some of the questions that were submitted? I do see some also in the Q&A here, but I know we have pre-submitted questions. So again, to our guests, our audience, we're not going to have enough time to go through them all. So we're going to pick a couple of them, and we appreciate you understanding. Dan?
Well, this will be an easy one for you, I'm sure. This comes from one of our faculty members. If I want to tell my students one sentence as to why equity and social justice are critical in educational opportunities, can you give me that sentence?
That Saddlebrook as an institution of higher learning has a commitment to the quest for truth and knowledge. And that quest cannot have genuine substance without embracing equity.
Write that down, everyone.
We have it recorded. Thank you, Dr. West. If I may ask a question, and I love this one, and this we're going to tie into you being a lover of music, to our opening video ballad of George Floyd. So, quote, "Thank you so much for visiting with Saddleback, Dr. West. You are one of my all-time favorites. I was curious about your thoughts on the phrase, quote, co-opting culture, end quote, regarding American music, since almost all of it cannot exist without Black American music." So whoever wrote that wants to know what you have to say about that.
Ooh, wow. Oh, appreciate that. Appreciate that. Indeed, indeed. Well, there's no doubt that American music is disproportionately shaped and molded by African influences and African insights, African drums, African rhythms and syncopations and dissonances and what have you. Absolutely. But what we have to understand is every culture is a hybrid culture. Going all the way back to the beginning of time. Every culture builds on certain elements of cultures that are in place. And so when you're looking at American music, I mean, Hank Williams is a musical genius. He's a blues man on the vanilla side of town. He would be the first to say he's profoundly influenced by the geniuses on the vanilla, on the chocolate side of town. You see, Robert Johnson, genius from Delta, Mississippi. He's not just listening to Black musicians. He's listening to musicians all around, as far as he can go, you see. Charlie Parker's listening to Stravinsky on the one hand, rooted in the blues, rooted in stride piano, rooted in Kansas City jazz. So any serious quester for truth and excellence is always interested in a variety of the voices, you see. So that in a white supremacist society, it's true that you can be a white imitator of Black musical forms and make a whole lot of money. There's no doubt about that. But in terms of being on the ranking of the greatness, it's like Art Tatum on the piano, the jazz pianos. Everybody knows. Coltrane said Art Tatum walk in the club, he said, "Stop, God just came in." Because he's blind, but like Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles, and playing the most beautiful jazz piano ever. Oscar Peterson said the same thing. Coy Tyner said the same thing. So that when it comes to greatness, based on discipline and what have you, no doubt. Now, Art Tatum didn't make as much money as some of the white pianists because we live in a white supremacist society. But I'm a little reluctant of using the word co-op too loosely. You see, could you take a vanilla brother like Eminem out of Detroit, back to Brother Stern. See, Eminem is a white brother in a black art form who is as real as a heart attack. You see, the Kendrick Lamar says, I studied Eminem and DMX. I studied Snoop. I studied Tupac. I studied Biggie. And Eminem is, as white as a stereotypical Norwegian. You know what I mean? Same would be true with Hall & Oates. Same would be true for Average White Band from Scotland. Amos Stewart. When he writes the song for Chaka Khan, what you gonna do for me? Shoot, you got black folk, including myself, break dancing like MC Hammer, make MC Hammer look like a Boy Scout. Written by a white Scottish brother. Or when James Witherly writes, neither one of us for Gladys Knight. Or you the best thing that ever happened to me for Gladys Knight. And James Cleveland reshaped it into Jesus' is best thing that happened to me. He's the ex-quarterback for the football team at the University of Mississippi. And he is as white as Jesse James. But his sensibility has been shaped by black people. And so I would never say James Witherly co-opted. You ask Gladys Knight, they sang 12 of his songs. So we can go on and on and on. Linda Creed, writing for the Stylistic, the Jewish sister, who's writing with a Jamaican, Tom Bell, for William Hart, one of the greatest of all of the falsettos with the Delphonics, right? That you got this coming together, the Jamaican, the Jewish sister, and there's William Hart singing La La La, means I love you. Can you remember when we were children? I mean, all of this, the arts bring us all together in that way, but the genius and the talent of black people has been disproportionately influential in the musical sounds. Absolutely. But it goes both ways, though. It really does go both. Miles Davis would have Brother Evans on the piano, white brother. They sounding good. Oh, they sounding mellow. John Coltrane, when he started his quartet, he got a brother from Harvard, Brother Dick. I just saw Brother Dick in the club before the pandemic. They say, Train, what you get a white brother on the piano, man? You got Red Garland and all these folk. He said, well, you kind of sounding good. We're going to try it out and see if it works. They stayed for 9 months. He brought in little McCoy. McCoy was almost a teenager then from Philadelphia. So it's a matter, they looking at something deeper than just the instrumentation when it comes to the music and and culture in that way. Right. But we can't overlook the fact that the owners of the industry, of the clubs, were rarely black people. The people who made the most money were rarely black people. Duke Ellington died broke as the 10 Commandments financially. And what did he say? He said, all I want is people to remember my name and to love. And I try to put a smile on my mom and father's face. See, that's my kind of greatness. That's what it is to be a serious love warrior. Traveling 320 days of the year for 50 years, you end up broke. All you want to do is put a smile on your mom and your daddy's face. So people say Duke Ellington, they remember some love and some discipline. And that's what we do. I go to his funeral, go to his grave. I can feel it from the grave. Count Basie the same way. I mean, that's what we want our students to have a sense of. We want you to be very successful, but don't confuse success for greatness. Use your success for greatness. He or she is greatest among you will be your servant. That's biblical. I believe that. How will you serve? How will you use your gifts to enable others so that they can be the best that they can be? Because you couldn't be who you are if somebody hadn't loved you and given so much to you. Whoever they are, parents, teachers, friends, whoever it is, that's who we are. That's the caravan of love that the Isley brothers were talking about coming out of the chocolate side of Cincinnati, you see. That's very much what Saddleback at his best, I think, is about. You know what I mean?
And going off of that, you I assume you have seen people in your life who have changed from an unwillingness to be humble, to reflect on privilege or the effect they may have on those in lesser situations of power. How do you suggest that willingness to become introspective and to change happens? Does it have to be somebody is confronted with something that affects them personally? Where does change, even in one person,
Yeah.
start?
Yeah, see, that's a tough one, my brother, because there's just so many different ways in which it happens, you know. It could be a catastrophe that made its way to your house and shook you to your core. Could be a book that you read. Could have been a song that you heard. You know what I mean? You're sitting around and listening to Stephen Sondheim's No More in Act 2 of Into the Woods. And it's one of the saddest, grimmest, bleakest songs imaginable. And yet it shakes you to the core. And you then end up upbeat. And you say, dang, how did that grimness wake me up? And I ended up upbeat. Well, because sometimes the sadness and the misery made known to you shatters some of the ice in your own heart and mind. And you wake up. So we wake up in so many different ways. I mean, sometimes you can just be standing there and overwhelmed by the ocean and say, dang, you know, I really thought I was somebody. And I feel like a speck of sand, overwhelmed by this beautiful, body of water. The sense of the sublime that Edmund Burke and the others talked about, standing in front of Grand Canyon. There's just so many different ways in which people can be awakened. So many different catalysts that can set in, that can put pressure on people to question themselves and interrogate themselves. And we all have our own stories. I mean, it's one thing we have to always remember. None of us were born woke in terms of seeing and feeling and acting courageously. We all had to be educated into broader seeing, deeper feeling, more courageous acting, especially based on examples that we have, you know. And these young brothers and sisters, you know, when in Ferguson, we getting arrested, you know, they say, Brother West, we gonna stay woke. I said, well, no, you stay woke, you're gonna suffer from insomnia now. I'm not staying woke like that now. I'm gonna stay fortified. See, I'm fortified to fructify. If I stay fortified, I can generate some fruit. I didn't say foliage now, because foliage is just superficial spectacle. The fruit is something that's tangible, you can touch, it's empowering, it's enabling. And you're supposed to, by your fruit, they shall know you. And that fruit is the joy, the love, the service, the grin, the touch, the hug, the empowerment, the encouragement, that heaven that you're leaving behind. That's the fruit. You see. And you can't leave that fruit behind if you're woke all the time. No, you got to fortify yourself. You got to pace yourself. You got to be a long distance runner. You got to be a marathoner in the quest for truth and love and justice. You come out sprinting, you haven't been working out, you're not going to last that long. No. You're going to end up well-adjusted to injustice and say, yeah, that was a nice little phase of my life when I was very progressive and I tried to do some things, but I grew up and now I'm very well-adapted to indifference and very well-adjusted to and I'm very successful and I'm living large and I ain't got too much to do with folk other than myself and people around me. Oh, I see. So that you only stayed woke for just a few years, huh? So you now went back to sleepwalking with all of your status and your title and things. You're not lifting as you climb. Oh, I see. You become part of the problem. You're still human. We still love you. But you become part of the problem now. And that's true no matter what color you are, or gender, or sexual orientation. You know what I mean? That's a human thing. It's a human thing.
Thank you, Dr. West. Speaking of which, and I want to, there was a question I read earlier because, you know, being inclusive, as was mentioned earlier, when we talk about voices, we certainly want to recognize and include social equality for the LGBTQ plus community.
Absolutely.
There was a question of how do we bring that group, that marginalized group, into this discussion. And so I just want to acknowledge that. And if we're remiss in identifying anyone, please forgive us in advance, because this is about inclusion of everyone. As a social worker, and I say that from my mother, forget the credentials. I'm a social worker by birth because of my mother. And so when we talk about marginalized populations, and that's what we teach in human services, when we talk about those who are not part of mainstream society, I want to say to our audience, to the folks who took the time to join us today, we are speaking exclusively of all of us, not just any one group. So I just wanted to say that.
Absolutely. And your precious mother's name was what?
Doris. Her name is Doris. Doris Ruth Prince is her maiden name. And she's been gone now for 15 years. But she lives on in myself and my siblings, I must say.
Oh, no, her afterlife and part of that work in your life. You putting a smile on today. Her face from the grave. You putting a smile on her face.
And vice versa. Thank you for asking that, Dr. West.
Indeed.
And she was a social worker by nature, if you will. So, I am my mother's daughter.
This is in Chi-Town. This is in Chicago, huh?
No, I'm a native Californian. So my siblings, siblings are from
Billy's
Chi-Town.
In Chicago, though.
Billy's in Chicago. My twin sisters, older sisters, and a younger sisters in Chicago, and younger brother and myself were born and raised here in California.
Right on, right on. No, indeed. And we also don't want to remember the physically challenged, the disabled.
Absolutely.
Who are oftentimes rendered invisible, our indigenous brothers and sisters, that we are embracing all. The thing is, you can't talk about everybody simultaneously.
Right.
So we don't want people to think that somehow we're overlooking them simply because we're zeroing in. But this includes everybody. You got poor white brothers and sisters all around the country, and folk all around the world catching hair, the Dalits and the Roma and the Uyghurs, and we can go on and on.
Especially now, you're right.
Absolutely.
And one of the questions I'm looking at that was pre-submitted, it states, if America wants to know its truth, begin with the suffering, the children, the prisoners. If we want to know the truth of our college, who should we begin listening to? I love that question. So that's open for, Dr. West, Dean Dan.
Oh, yeah, Brother Dean Dan, you can jump in on that one too.
Yeah. I have a thought, but I'm going to reserve my thought for another time.
Well, we can just say the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak, to allow the voices to speak. But again, we say the voices that are critically filtered, because no voices have unmediated access to truth. You see, truth is bigger than any voice. And so the question is, we have to be able to hear it, take it seriously, critically filter and examine it, and then make our judgments. And people do the same thing to our voices.
Sure.
And it's got to be a mutual, reciprocal, equal exchange. And again, this is an ideal. We right back to the question before. This is an ideal, but it's an ideal worth holding on to, because see, part of the problem these days in our culture is that we're not just polarized, we're gangsterized. And there's a qualitative difference between a gangster and a hypocrite. Hypocrisy is an ugly thing. But hypocrisy is a compliment that vice pays to virtue. So when you're a hypocrite, you still give value to virtue. You just try to hide it to allow your vice to proceed. So you try to disguise it. So virtue still is operating in your world. When you're a gangster, you have no sense of virtue at all. You don't care. You have no shame, no regrets. Did you say it? Yeah, I said it. What you gonna do about it? You ain't got no power. Whereas the hypocrite say, well, I didn't really mean that. I want to appear as I'm very different. And this is part of the challenge with some of our white centrists and moderates and white liberals sometimes, right? That they can say one thing, and then when it's time to be tested, they get weak as pre-sweetened Kool-Aid. And you say, wait, I thought we were in a foxhole together. I can't rely on you. I can't depend on you. Well, no, I really not. What I said, you shouldn't have taken it as seriously as that. I'm going the other way. Well, see, that's a hypocrite. So they wanted to at least couch it in a way that they looked like they were virtuous, but they still tied to a certain kind of cowardliness. Whereas a gangster is like, you know what, I don't like you, can't stand you. I'm gonna do everything I can against you. And you say to a gangster, you know, thanks for the honesty and the candor, but you spiritually vacuous, and we involved in a serious battle. We got a conflict coming. And once you end up with a culture that more and more just gets gangsterized and people just don't care about virtues at all, integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, I'm not interested in that stuff. I want money, I want prosperity, I want domination, and I feel good about it, and I want to feel good, period. What you gonna do, Brother West? I said, well, we got some truth telling and justice seeking, and you on my prayer list. You know, you ain't at the top, but you on my prayer list. And we got some battles, we got some struggles, but all of us still human. All of us still made in the image of God.
Related to that almost hedonistic approach to life, and still struggling with many of the same societal injustices that, you know, predate me certainly. But one of the questions that came in from an individual who lived through civil rights activism in the 60s, the question was, do we approach activism in the same way? Did it work? Or do we need to approach it in a fundamentally different way than what we saw folks earlier do?
Well, I think the spirit of activism ought to be the same in terms of willingness to serve and sacrifice, motivated by a love and justice rather than hatred and revenge. That's the spiritual and moral challenge. That's true for every generation. See, love never goes out of style. Never. Caring and concern for people never goes out of style. But in terms of this particular strategies and tactics, how you protest. In the 60s, you know, we couldn't protest on social media. Didn't have such a thing. Right. We couldn't protest on TV for the most part, just had 3 channels. And you get the representation of what you were doing based on just those 3 channels. You know, we had more journalism. We had a much more rigorous journalistic culture than we do now. One of the sad features of our world is the degree to which our journalists these days are just so weak and feeble. They don't have a strong accountability, answerability response. A lot of times it's just reactive. You know, you respond to this email, respond to this tweet or whatever it is. You see, that's not journalism. Journalism is something much deeper. That's Ida B. Wells, I.F. Stone. Those are great journalists. Walter Lippmann. They give you a context. They lay bare the dynamics of a story. It's not just a reaction, you see. So that I think the strategies and tactics are going to be new. That's when we have to be creative. Each generation comes up with various forms of strategies and tactics. But activism always, I think, has some impact when it's tied to a love and justice motivation. It really does, because it just lets people know there are exemplars out there who care. It's like, okay, the public lynching of Brother Floyd. Who cares? Remember Marvin Gaye? What's going on? Who really cares? Look at all these people who care. 4,700 rallies, 2,000 cities, every color, every gender, every religion, every non-religion, so forth. They care. That says a lot. That says a whole lot. So, but it didn't change as much as we thought. You're absolutely right. It takes more to change the world than a demonstration. But a demonstration allows you to bear witness. There's a lot of different ways of bearing witness. Now, we do need fundamental change. We do need to put pressure on any status quo. You know, it could be status quo at Harvard, status quo at Saddleback. but you're able to work with and bring that pressure in such a way that you can produce some very concrete, sustainable, lastable results for the students, because that's what we're all here for as teachers and professors. It's for the students.
Right.
But we recognize that there's no built-in guarantee of any kind of victory. Oh no, not at all.
Starting off the conversation today, we wanted to frame this as big, philosophical, theoretical,
Right.
and then filter down to pragmatism in our lap. What can the administrator, the faculty member, the student, the community member take away today that will make a positive change in their sphere? Because the fact of the matter is, we have our different, we have our spheres. We have our immediate ability to impact someone. So if you were to, within our last 15 minutes or so here, if you were to give us one or two immediate suggestions that the ordinary person, as you have referenced today, the ordinary person could do to bring about equity in our sphere, what would those mean? What would that look like?
Within the context of education, though, primarily. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes. No, it's another wonderful question. This has been such a magnificent conversation with you all, though. I'm telling you, Saddleback got something going on in a number of different ways. One I would say is we just want to commit ourselves to being persons of integrity, honesty, and decency, and treating each student with the preciousness they deserve across the board. Mm-hmm. Secondly, recognizing that given the history of the country, that there are a whole wave of students who either have not had the opportunity to gain access, but if they do gain access, they might be wrestling with challenges to their self-confidence because Saddleback would be such a new environment for them. Make them feel welcome. Provide the conditions under which they can believe in themselves, have confidence in themselves, and engage in their quest for truth and knowledge, because Saddleback's about the quest for truth and knowledge. Third thing is, given that quest for truth and knowledge, you want your curriculum and you want your faculty to look like the variety of voices, the lifting of voices, such that they can participate in that quest for truth and knowledge with everybody else. Mm-hmm. So it's not a matter of bringing folk in who have been discriminated against, or ghettoized, and saying, well, we have a sensitivity to your suffering, and it would be so nice to bring in a brown or a black or so-and-so on the faculty because we're just so behind. We got cultural lag. No. This is rooted in the fundamental mission of the institution, that I'm here as a black person, a brown person, a woman, or whatever, because I got a voice to say in shaping how we engage in the quest for truth and knowledge. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's at the center of the calling of the institution. It's not some psychological sensitivity to folk who've been catching hell for 400 years. That's a missionary attitude, you see. You ought to be lucky that you're here. We don't know how long you're going to keep you. Hey, I'm a human being. You know what my mama's like? Would you like to meet my brother? What you talking about? I was like, please. I mean, I had that with the president of Harvard. He come, bringing me in his office. Oh, that's we noticed that you associated with hip hop, and that doesn't make Harvard look well. I had to look that brother in his eyes. I say, my brother, I am as much Harvard as you are. I'm the man you think you are. I mean, I didn't last long, but I had to be honest. You know what I mean?
You came back.
Wait a minute. You don't know Clifton and Irene. You don't know Shiloh Baptist Church. You don't know Sly Stone playing in our church every fifth Sunday. Please, I'm a person of self-respect. I'm respecting you. You're going to respect me. Not because I'm coercive, but because I'm worthy of respect. I would want to treat every student the way I would want to be treated. That golden rule, whatever I want people to do and respond and respect me, that's what I'm going to do to others. So when the Black students come, the brown students come, the white students, the Asians and so forth, all respected. The faculty come in, join the quest for truth and knowledge. That's what we hear. That's what Saddleback's about. Since 1968, that's what we about, you see. But it's got to be, you see? So you're going to have Audre Lorde's voice there, not because she's a lesbian sister. She's a great poet. You're going to have Adrienne Rich there. You're going to have James Baldwin there because they are great writers. You have Toni Morrison there, not because we got to have a Black writer in the class in order to make things look like they so diversified in our curriculum. No. Toni Morrison, like Faulkner, like Shakespeare, like Dante, like Shelley, like Swinburne, like Bellow, all of them great artists. They involved in the quest for truth. You see the point I'm making? All of those different levels. And then last but not least, you got to treat your staff with respect. There is no Saddleback without your staff. Mm-hmm. Students can't go to a place without Saddleback operating based on its staff. You see? Now, they don't get a chance to teach the classes. They don't get a chance sometimes to take the classes, but they're part of the precious community of Saddleback. So you're all in it together. You're all in it together, and you hope and pray that being on that boat together is not a Titanic, or it's not Melville's Pequod that's about to go under, but rather it's a ship sailing ahoy. Brother Stern, now the captain, you all part of that ship, each one on that ship feeling as if their humanity is being affirmed, their sense of possibility and potentiality is being empowered. And then comes the laughter, the humor, and then you bring Brother Billy and his group back to play some more music to continue to take us higher. Because in the end, all of us, we just want to go a little higher. That's all. We just want to go a little higher. We want a little tender love and care. We want a little recognition and acknowledgement. We want to be loved and give love. We want to be able to support our families materially with things, a decent house, with education and health care, and bury our parents with dignity. And when we go, our child will have both tears and laughter of what we gave them. That's true for all of us, no matter what color, what gender, what national identity. And that's the blues. That's what it is. That's the blues right there. That's it right there.
Thank you for that, Dr. West. We have a few minutes left. I just want to go back just a little bit and speak to the question, or the person who posed the question about who do we listen to at the college. And Dr. West, I think you spoke to it. My basic answer to that is we learn to listen to each other, whether or not we agree, even when it's uncomfortable, because we're living in really uncomfortable times. But I think part of that, from my perspective, my response would be that we learn to listen to each other, whether or not we agree. And that's what the educational environment is all about. And I can only hope to continue to serve, to make it a safe place so that students can find their voices and make the choices to make the changes so we can go forward, Dan, as you mentioned, go forward, not stagnant and not backward. I want to say, as we come to a close of this event, Dr. West, I wish we could hold on to you for the whole entire weekend. I'll hang with you. But like you said, we can't stay woke too long. We got to get some rest, you know. But if I could, I'd hold on to you for the rest of the weekend.
We want to go extra. That's cool with me. That's fine. We can bring Billy and them back for another song.
Okay. Billy's here. Billy and his wife Rosa, they're here. My family's here. We have Chelsea's family in Tennessee. So we've got friends and
that's
family.
wonderful. That's
So
wonderful.
thanks everybody for being here. But what I would like to say, then I'm going to pass this on and give you the last word, is another thing I do in my classes is as an educator, and it might be the same for you as well. One of the things I share with students is my wish for them, and it's an educator's dream for a student to begin a semester and experience a broadened perspective. So when they finish the semester, when they leave, they are a different person than who began the semester. So I say that in hopes that those of you who took the time to join us today will leave with a little more hope and a broadened perspective about the challenges that we're all facing and living with today. Dr. West, I'm going to drop this last quote to you, and then I'm going to leave it alone. This is another beautiful quote from Dr. West, quote, "As a lover of music, I'm a blues man in the life of the mind. I'm a jazz man in the world of ideas." Dr. West, we're humbled to have you here today. That's your quote, and I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, I tell you, my dear sister, you've just been so wonderful and so wise and so embracing. Brother Dan, you've been so encouraging and inspiring in both the conversations. Sister Chelsea, it's just been a blessing to be able to talk to you. And you brought in your precious 1-2 slide stones. Stone says it's a family affair, and it is a family affair. We all in this together. To the best of our ability. I'll just say this at the end here that I'm just so blessed to be here, be with you all. I'm sorry I couldn't get to Southern California. There'll come a time when I'll be able to get back to Saddleback. But I think in the end, it's going to be a question of us not being surprised overwhelmed by any evil and not being paralyzed or debilitated by any despair. And see, that's what it means to be fortified. So you got a lot of people running around talking, oh my God, I just can't believe this is the case and this is the case. And I just feel so uncomfortable. I feel so insecure. There's been people in America every day of their lives who have felt uncomfortable, insecure. It's just a matter of how fortified you are to be able to get through it and accent the best of you and the best of others. So a lot of times it's just a question of, well, the crisis just hasn't got to your house yet. It hasn't got to your neighborhood yet. Other folk been wrestling with it for a long time. So you can learn something from those folk who've been wrestling with it for a long time. And the whole nation has the blues. Some folk had the blues for 400 years. You can learn something from the blues people if now the blues is new for your experience and so forth. Not to say that any people have a monopoly, because again, but when I say blues, I'm not talking about just every Black person. There's no such thing as Black people in a monolithic, homogeneous way. It's a collection of a whole lot of different Black folks. Some choose Disneyland and Peter Pan. That's not the blues. Peter Pan don't want to grow up in Disneyland. You got fun staying on Main Street with your Kool-Aid and popcorn. And I ain't got nothing against, Disneyland and Disney World. I'll take my kids there, but I tell them the difference between reality and fantasy. We dealing with reality here. And what you all are presenting is what the Greeks call paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A. That's deep education. That's not cheap schooling. This is not just about acquiring skills and information. This is about forging critical consciousness with the skills and what Professor Branch Stewart's sister Kim calls transformation. That's the difference between dialogue and chit-chat. You see, when folk had dialogue with Socrates, it wasn't chit-chat because they were transformed. They were not just informed. They left differently than they were when they entered. And so it was with Amos. So it was with Jesus. So it was with Muhammad. that when you encountered them, you felt something such that you had to examine yourself and be willing to undergo transformation. What the New Testament called metanoia. Now, of course, Christians call it conversion, but it's the metanoia and the pedagogy are very similar in terms of fundamental transformation of how you see the world, how you feel things in that world, especially the suffering of others, and then how you choose to act with courage, compassion, and humility, so that the sign and the signal of your life becomes one in which he or she, non-binary precious one, lived a life such that we saw and felt and can confirm that they did the best that they could, leaning toward that hesed, that Socratic heaven, that sense of justice that still could be crushed at any moment, given the cold and cruel ways of the world. But up to now, there's still some love, there's still some justice, there's still some courage, there's still some integrity in the world. And we just want to make sure that it's never snuffed out.
We're going to hold on to that, Dr. West. Thank you. I see our dear president has rejoined us. Dr. Stern?
Thank you so much for allowing me to spend the last couple hours with you, Dr. West. This has been a treat, a pleasure. I want to thank you for being here at Saddleback and gracing us with your presence. I think we're all a little bit more smart and a little bit more woke as a result, and I appreciate you being here. We look forward to meeting you in person someday. I want to thank our facilitators, Dan Predal and Kim Branch Stewart. I want to thank Chelsea for coordinating. I want to thank all of the community members, the college, my colleagues, my dear colleagues, students who've joined us. We're really grateful to be spending a little time with you, however imperfect in a Zoom world. But especially I want to thank Professor Branch Stewart for making this happen today. This was a real treat for our college, and it's something we won't soon forget. We will have this recording, and your legacy will be with us for a long time, Dr. West. Thank you for being here.
Oh, salute you all. Thank you so much.
Thank
love
you all
love
so
love
much.
Stay strong.
Love
Your
you,
loved
Dr.
ones.
West.
Be safe in this pandemic.
We'll see you on the other side. Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely.
President Stern, thank you.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
Kim.
much, Brother Stern.
Thanks, everyone.